Hey Summoners, welcome back to our channel. I'm happy to see you guys again. My name is Nathan and I'll be your host for our promised upcoming changes video. In this one, we'll provide you guys with the details behind next patch. These are what you can expect as well as prepare for. A quick disclaimer is that some changes might be tweaked, removed, or added once a patch finally releases, but usually these changes are pretty accurate. Make sure you hit that sub button and let's go ahead and jump right into the video. First things first, we have to talk about what you guys really came here for. That's right, we have a bunch of new skins coming up next patch. Lagoon Dragon Kaisen, Tranquility Dragon Karma, Steel Dragon Thresh, Duality Dragon Volibear, and a prestige version of the same skin, Dream Dragon Yasuo, and the Truth Dragon Yasuo will be all in the shop next patch. Make sure you check them out, it looks like a ton of work was put into them. With important stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the balance changes next. We'll start with the system changes. In regards to nerfs, we have a few coming up. The first is for Guardian, which is seeing a flat nerf. The shield will be reduced by 20 at all ranks, making it way weaker early as well as later into the game. This nerf comes as a surprise to me, but there are a good number of support champions that use it, and as a result of it, it's likely that enchanters will continue to find more success, at least the ones that use Summon Aerie instead of Guardian. I'm certain a lot of players are now happy to know that Conqueror is finally receiving a nerf. The depth of force per stack will be reduced later on into the game, and the buff duration will be lowered by 2 whole seconds. Providing less damage is already a solid nerf, but the fact that it'll be harder to retain the stacks is a huge change. In cases that you're able to kite an opponent for 4 seconds, which is definitely doable unlike the current 6 seconds, you can essentially force the reset on your opponent, and they'll have to regain their Conqueror stacks. As always, maxing out the stacks on Conqueror is rewarding, but now players will need to put in an extra amount of effort to maintain the stacks during a fight. A new change that was added was a nerf to the Ravenous Hunter. As always, and in Season 11 fashion, this rune is broken. Free sustain is quite unfair. It definitely feels good to have though, and I wouldn't have it any other way personally. Just make sure it's not too broken, and it'll definitely find a place in the rune system. The Omnivamp per stack will be reduced slightly, making it weaker but still viable. Finally, we have a nerf to the item Gore Drinker. The active damage will be changed from 100% total AD to 175% base AD, and the HP regeneration is going to be removed. And then a new Omnivamp stat is added, and the Spy passive has also been removed. Overall, this significantly lowers the damage the item provides, but increases the sustain in teamfights. Omnivamp feels right to have on the item, and while the HP regeneration has been removed, Omnivamp is almost always more relevant during combat. Unless you're playing Dr. Mundo, that is. Spy's removal severely weakens champions that currently built this item. It provided a ton of extra bonus AD, and thus, Bruisers are looking a little bit weaker next patch. Trinity Force might finally have a chance to shine as a result. Next, we have buffs. Ingenious Hunter is up for a buff. Unlike Ravenous Hunter, this rune is not OP and needs some assistance. The base item haste as well as item haste per stack is going up next patch. This should make it a more reasonable rune to take, especially when you're running Predator alongside it. Another simple buff is to the health rune stat shard. While the change itself is pretty straightforward, it's a pretty big buff. The max health the rune will provide will go up from 90 to 140, making it significantly more valuable to take. This is a heavy incentive to be greedy and take a scaling rune rather than the one that provides immediate early game value. Here are some adjustments. The final change is for Stride Breaker, which is receiving an adjustment. Like Gore Drinker, the active damage will receive an identical change. In addition, the bonus AD the item provides will go up by 5. These changes make the active effect a lot weaker in the late game, but roughly the same early on. However, the 5 bonus damage is a nice way to compensate and make sure the item doesn't end up any weaker than before. As a result of these item changes, the meta will definitely see some shifts in the next few patches. Now is a great time to contact one of our trained challenger coaches over at ProGuides.com. If you want to quickly improve and hit your rank goals at the end of the season, they're more happy to help. And that's it for the system, so let's go ahead and talk about the champions next. Beginning with top lane changes, let's go ahead and talk about Quinn. She's not particularly popular, but currently holds a high win rate around 53% in high elo. Ultimately, Quinn is a strong lane bully who can use her early game leads to roam mid or even bottom to start moving the game forward. Her scaling is also acceptable as she's a marksman. Next patch, her W's bonus attack speed will be reduced in the late game. So they buffed Sion and nothing ended up changing for him. Next patch, he's receiving another buff, and I want to know who's down to play him. His W's max HP to shield ratio is going up by 3%. This is pretty huge in the early game and obviously in the late game where he's a massive tank with a limitless amount of HP to potentially work with. In the early game, the additional shield makes it not only better at soaking up damage, but it'll end up being easier to actually activate it. Sion's enemies will have a slightly harder time breaking the shield, and even if it survives with a single point of health, it's enough to detonate after for some nice damage. Teemo is up for some serious round of buffs next patch as well. His Q's cooldown is going down, the blind duration is going up, and the missile speed is going to be increased. No, nothing is more annoying than the blind duration. But you know what? Go off, Riot. These are big changes, and Teemo will certainly climb up the tier list as a result of them. The cooldown buff alone is enough, but the fact that he'll be able to blind an enemy for 3 whole seconds is massive. He can cripple an enemy marksman for that long and do it again 4 seconds or less later. So before moving on, let me ask you our question of the day. What do you think is the most underrated ability in the game? For me, it's probably Nasus's E. His stacking Q and impressive W are easy to spot, but the fact that he shreds 45% of the enemy's armor at max rank is also pretty insane. Let me know your answers in the comments down below. Next up is the jungle. In the jungle, Graves has been popping off and Riot is taking away some power. Rather than touching his damage, his excessive tankiness is the target next patch, with his E's armor going down by 2. This effect can stack up to 8 times, meaning that he can end up with a total of 16% less effective health than before. Don't underestimate this nerf, but I'll be transparent and say he'll likely remain OP even after that. Next is a buff for Viego. He's receiving some damage buffs to help him out after the big nerfs that he previously received. His Q's AD ratio will be now increased, W self-slow lowered, and his ultimate's crit ratio is going up as well. Riot is trying harder and harder to incentivize Viego players to build crit. They want him to be a rewarding pick, but also squishier, so there's a good amount of counterplay available as well. And that's it for the jungle, so let's go ahead and move to the mid lane next. In the mid lane, we have a nerf for Akshan. Once again, his E is receiving a nerf. At max rank, the damage will be reduced by another 20, lowering the threat of his burst damage. Since his ability can reset, there are many scenarios where this nerf will change the outcome of future fights. This is also identical to the previous nerf that Akshan received, and hopefully it'll be enough to keep him under control. Since Akshan has been doing well in top lane as well, he'll likely suffer enough from this damage nerf that he won't be able to bully the beefier opponents as easily. Next is the bottom lane. We have a decent number of bot lane changes, but let's go ahead and start with the nerfs. Miss Fortune is a priority for next patch as she's currently the most popular bot laner and for good reason. Her relentless early game allows her to not only pull ahead, but starve her lane opponents. At the same time, she also makes it a lot easier for her team to pick up early dragons by simply existing and playing out the laning phase. Next patch, her base mana will be reduced and her W's mana cost will go up. This isn't a huge nerf, but it should require players to be a little bit more conservative on how they use their abilities. The other bot lane nerf is for Karthus. Yeah, you heard that right. Bottom lane Karthus is actually relevant right now. His play rate is definitely on the lower side, but the current 54% win rate in high elo means that something is definitely amiss. With the nerf he's about to receive, Riot probably wants him to remain viable in the bot lane, but simply come out a little bit weaker than before. His E's mana refund will be decreased early on, but increased later into the game. With the level 1 mana refund reduced by 5, Karthus ends up with less mana all the way up to level 8, when he puts in a second point into the ability. If it ends up being a big enough issue, I'm sure players can go ahead and put a second point in the ability early on, but of course that means they'll miss out on some big damage from their Q. This nerf seriously won't be that huge deal in the jungle as long as he has blue buff, and also won't do much in the mid lane since the solo experience allows Karthus to quickly hit level 8. Now for buffs, we'll be starting with Jinx. Her passive's total attack speed is going up, her E's cast range will be increased, and her ultimate's cooldown is receiving a sizable cooldown buff. The passive change is to her total attack speed, not bonus or base attack speed. Because of this, Jinx will receive a massive damage boost whenever she scores a takedown. This strengthens her chaotic reset based playstyle rather effectively. The buff to her E is nice, but small changes and buffs to her ultimate is especially noticeable in the early game where it will have a 75-second cooldown. You definitely shouldn't sleep on Jinx this patch. Finally, we have another buff for Xayah. These are huge buffs, unironically. Her movement speed will go up by 5 and her Q's cooldown will be reduced by 2 seconds at max rank. Movement speed is great, especially since Xayah doesn't have particularly long range. She'll have an easier time maneuvering around team fights and also when trying to chase down enemies. As for the Q change, this is a gigantic buff, lowering the ability's cooldown to 4 seconds in the later parts of the game. And this isn't even accounting cooldown reduction. Throw in any ability haste and this goes down even more. Xayah will certainly see more play and a higher win rate as a result of this buff. Just don't forget that she also received numerous other ones in the previous patches. Finally, let's go ahead and conclude with the support changes. Well, there is just one support change, and that's for Lux. Her attack speed per level is going up by 1%, her passive mark duration will increase if a basic attack is in flight or R is being cast, her E's damage is going up, and her ultimate's cooldown early on will be reduced. These are small buffs all across the board that makes Lux stronger as both a support and as a mid laner. At the moment, Lux stares in the direction of full AP always, so almost every Lux player will benefit from them. And that concludes our upcoming changes for patch 11.21. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Make sure you check out the description for a link to join our Discord. We have an excellent community that you want to be sure to check out. And you'll also be the first to know about any future giveaways for things like RP or free coaching. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.